My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, it's John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and it's the Entrepreneurial You, the show for dedicated and passionate Caribbean entrepreneurs seeking daily inspiration, brought to you by author, speaker, and award-winning entrepreneur Heneka Watkis-Porter. You must be prepared to ignite.
All right, my friends, it is the Entrepreneurial You podcast, the show that inspires and continues to motivate entrepreneurs by hosting terrific guests like Seth Godin, Lisa Nichols, Les Brown, John Lee Dumas. So many. I'm your host, Heneka Watkis-Porter. Welcome to another vibrant episode of the Entrepreneurial You. And today I'm thrilled to have the founder and CEO of One Wealth Advisors with us. His extensive experience spans financial life, planning, hospitality, and the arts. Before I reveal this versatile entrepreneur, let me pause to let you know this episode is brought to you by the Jamaica Stock Exchange, Next Step Digital Services, and 5 Minute Bookkeeper. Before we dive in, let's have a word from the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
We needed to raise capital, but our experience with local financial institutions was that they were cautious and slow to act, and interest rates were far too high. We had real concerns about financing our business through outside equity investors and the possibility of interference. Could we get a fair valuation for our business? We had our own ideas about the business and its value. Should I go the traditional route of bank financing, or should I try the Jamaica Stock Exchange? So we made a call and experienced transformation of our business through conversations. I'm John Mafood, CEO of Jamaican Teas, and we're listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
Give us a call today at 876-967-3271 to begin your transformation through conversation. We want to see your company listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
Welcome back. Today I have joining me someone whose primary role is founder and CEO of One Wealth Advisors, where they help people simplify their lives and achieve their financial goals through financial life planning. His other professional involvements include founder and executive chairman of Flower and Water Hospitality Group and managing partner of Great Goals Hospitality Group. The arts and entertainment worlds are particularly important to this guest, primarily through his work as a managing partner of Noise Pop, but he's also a mixed media collage artist, a producer of several plays, and a playwright. He's an avid supporter of local arts and cultural organizations through his work on the board of Playground, a nonprofit playwright incubator, and his work on the advisory board of Zero Footprint, an organization that works with restaurants all over the world that are committed to fighting climate change. Let's welcome the man of steel, David Steele. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Icebreaker for you. If you could host a dinner party with any 3 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Wow. Steve Jobs would be at the top of my list. Don't want to get too political. I'm probably not going to vote for him, but Donald Trump, I would love to meet him and talk to him and get to understand the person behind the persona. and my grandmother, who was the person probably that I lost that's closest to me. I'd love to have one more dinner with her.
So, David, as I mentioned in the introduction of you, you have a wide and varied background. Let's talk about how did that happen? First of all, like, how did you get so interested in all these various things? And with that, I'd like to know what's nearest and dearest to your heart.
Well, people look at my background and see a polymath, like somebody that does all these different things successfully that seemingly have nothing to do with each other, and that's somehow inaccessible to the average person. And I would like to push back on that characterization because for me, everything I do is the same, which is it's all around people. And I actually think that behind every successful person, entrepreneur, or anything anybody's ever built, you're always going to find symbiosis and collaboration with other human beings. So for me, everything I do is actually the same. It's just people. And that's my mindset. Every day I wake up, what can I do for people in the service of my partners, my business partners? What can I do for clients of my financial planning firm? What can I do for my friends, my family? That's what I wake up every day thinking about. So I don't think that everything I do, which is seemingly different, is actually different. It's all the same. So I don't have anything nearer or dearer to my heart in terms of my different interests, because my perspective is it's all the same. It's people.
All right. So do you find that people working in the arts versus those or in the finances, is there a different personality profile as you deal with those people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've been on many boards of nonprofit organizations, and I have found that when there is a profit motive, there's tends to be quicker decisions and more efficiency. From my limited experience, well, it's not that limited. I mean, I've been on 4 or 5 different boards of nonprofits, and that is a pretty common trait of nonprofits. So I have some criticism in that regard, and I have a compliment. I mean, I money is not the first thing I think about every day, making myself money or my company's money. It's people. But I do think there's something to be said for when you're worried about satisfying your personal base needs of food and shelter and being warm and dry and maybe being loved. And what you do every day is dependent upon satisfying those needs. You tend to move a little bit quicker, more efficiently, and more pragmatically, maybe. And I don't think that nonprofits totally have that orientation or that psychological motivation.
Yeah, why is that though? Why do you think that is? Because I tend to agree with you. Why do you think that is?
Well, at the end of the day, a nonprofit organization has to have a zero at the end of the income statement each year. That is to say, every dollar that comes in has to go out. And so the employees of the nonprofit organization, they get a paycheck, and that hopefully satisfies their needs. They tend to be lower paid than for-profit companies, so that's a different conversation. But they're not allowed to get bonuses based on being more profitable. They're not going to be personally incentivized to make the organization be run more efficiently or increase revenues, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think it's a fundamental difference, and from my perspective, maybe even a flaw or opportunity for improvement in the nonprofit space. Maybe the word nonprofit is the problem.
That's it. And that's why I'm so big on no, rather than running a nonprofit, I do run a social enterprise. With that, you're supposed to be making profit, right? Therein lies the difference. And there's still some challenges there, but we digress. Let's get back to you and focus on you, David. We talked about, just a little into financial life planning. You are doing finances. So let's talk about what really is financial life planning and why it's important.
Financial life planning is goal setting for you as an individual or as a family. And it's the articulation of goals that really is probably the hardest thing for people to do. And when you have goals that you've established, you can usually quantify those goals. And then oftentimes it's all that hard to develop a plan to pursue the achievement of those goals. But we have found, I mean, my industry usually calls it financial planning. There's a certified financial planner designation. And I think we coined the phrase financial life planning. I'm sure others have done it as well. But the reason we do that is because we work really hard at my company to help our clients unpack not just what their goals are, but why they have those goals. We have found that it's really common for people to live life without a lot of personal, authentic thought around why they want what they want. For example, college, graduate college, get job that pays well, get married, have kids, maybe buy a home, pay for kids' college education, et cetera, et cetera. And all those things are, in fact, pretty common what people actually want. But what we do is we challenge people to think about these things. The one goal we often have people try to unpack is this idea of retirement. We find that people just automatically assume, well, when I'm a certain age, I want to retire. And we often push back and say, why? Because many of our clients that retire end up being less happy post-retirement than they were pre-retirement. And my hypothesis is that's because they've lost a huge part of their sense of purpose, of their self-worth. And I philosophically believe that happiness comes from, once you have your base needs met, feeling loved and valued. And what ends up happening with people when they retire is a big portion of their source of that feeling of being valued goes away. And so there's a particular person on my team at One Wealth who, when he joined me 15 years ago, kept saying, I'm going to retire at this age, I'm going to retire at this age. And finally, I got him to say, well, maybe I'm not going to ever have to retire. I can just delegate out the things that I dislike about my job and maybe even go part-time, but still apply my mastery as they get older, doing the things that I actually love doing. And so we live in a world of binaries, and a lot of people see decisions as very binary: work, don't work. And there's sometimes in betweens. Sometimes there's these non-binary decisions you can make. So anyway, I'm rambling, but that's financial life planning really is about unpacking these goals people have. The what are they? Why? Are you sure those are your goals? Are there other ways of looking at these things? And then developing a plan to achieve those goals.
Yeah. David, thank you so much. And speaking of goals, perhaps for my listeners, you may want to offload your bookkeeping. So let's talk about not David, but I'm talking here of my sponsor, 5-Minute Bookkeeper. So 5-Minute Bookkeeper is for the entrepreneur who hasn't done bookkeeping for their business all year and doesn't want to scramble right at the tax deadline to download 12 months of bank statements and credit card statements to compile it all in one weekend. With 5-Minute Bookkeeper, you can do 1 year of bookkeeping in 1 hour or less. So yes, that's interesting. So I had to, as we're talking about, financial life planning, had to bring that in to highlight our sponsor, 5-Minute Bookkeeper. Now, back to my conversation with David. What are the key elements to consider when planning for financial security?
What are the key considerations? Well, number one, spend less than you make. And that applies to every point along your life. There's also a difference between wealth and income. And a lot of people that, like myself, that don't come from a family that had any wealth. We were my brother and I raised by a single mom who was a school teacher. It's really hard to contemplate the concept that at some point in time, the most valuable thing you have is not the income you get from your job, but it might be because of wealth you've developed. And all of a sudden, the wealth you've developed, in fact, is more valuable, can pay you more. I put pay in quotes, pay you more than your job pays you. And all of a sudden, you're rethinking why you work, which may not actually be for income. And so There's phases of life, and depending upon your particular situation, you often bring your history, your past, to every point in your life, even though there may be a point in your life you no longer have to worry about income, it's wealth. So, but in every instance, it is spend less than you make, which seems to be really hard for people, especially seemingly in America, where everybody has access to debt quite easily. Institutions will gladly lend you money at very unreasonable interest rates, and people develop a very interesting relationship with money from that, which can be toxic.
Mhm. Let's talk about money trauma, because as when I hear you speak right now, I'm just thinking about some money trauma that people have that will impact them spending, less than they make, things like that. What are some of, in your work at One Wealth Advisors, some money trauma that you perhaps come across your clients facing? And perhaps even you yourself had faced at one point or another.
Yeah, I mean, I was in my 20s. I had a very high income, but I was spending more than I made, and I incurred a lot of debt, and I actually had to go through a pretty cathartic, painful, traumatic experience where I sold the house I had bought and moved into a small studio apartment and paid my debt off. And it allowed me at that time, and I was fortunate, I worked my way through it. It allowed me to focus on the business of my business in doing things the right way rather than being on the treadmill and running around and scurrying to try to make money possibly the wrong way. That is, do business that felt inauthentic to the type of business that we wanted to do. So I was fortunate that I had the maturity in my 20s to sort of clean up my act. But we find a lot of people that they just want to kick the can down the road. It's interesting. We have some clients, our company has over $1 billion in assets under management. And for 380 families, you can do the math. There's some very wealthy people with us. It's interesting that we don't see a very high correlation between people who have more wealth and have a healthier relationship with money. That is to say, I often tell people 2 + 2 = 4, even if it feels like it equals 5. 2 + 2 = 4, even if it feels like it equals 3. What do I mean by that? There's some people that have all the money in the world, yet they think they can spend more than they actually can afford to spend based on their strategic plan. On the other hand, there's some people who are very overly cautious with money, and they're not even spending anywhere near what they could afford to spend. And the psychology around that could be very limiting. And so I think the people that have trauma around money, you hear a lot about the depression babies who were raised as kids during the Great Depression, and it informed the rest of their lives, regardless of what their capabilities were in terms of wealth. And so I think it's really important, as probably it is for all psychology, for people to unpack why they are with money the way they are. It's psychoanalytic rich territory, this money stuff.
All right, so I'm still going to camp out a little at the spend less than you make pack. And where I want to go with this is, you live in America, right? The land of the free. And it's all about what seemingly defies the concept of spending less than you make, because it's all about that credit score and trying to get as much credit as you can. What are your thoughts on that? Let's hear it.
Well, I think there's very few reasons to ever borrow money that make sense. And I'm not talking about somebody who's desperate that needs to feed themselves and somebody's going to lend them money to do it. I admit that what I'm about to say, it doesn't apply to people who are in very, very desperate situations. I have no expertise in that regard. What I'm talking about when I talk about not borrowing, I'm talking about people that have most of their base needs met and they're trying to grow their circumstance. The US government, the IRS, incentivize people to borrow to buy homes You're allowed to borrow $750,000 in a loan amount and then deduct that interest against your income. So if you have a decent income and you borrow 750,000, the interest you pay the bank is actually relatively low net of the tax benefit. And so borrowing money to buy a home is probably what we would characterize as good debt, because you have to live somewhere. Borrowing maybe to pay for college is good debt if you don't have another way to go to college, assuming you decide to pursue a career where you're actually going to get a return on investment for college, which many people go to college and they're not thinking about a return on investment. That is to say, what does it cost me to go to college versus what am I going to make? And then trying to figure out what I'd make without going to college. That's an interesting perspective that a lot of people don't. I mean, we see clients succumb to their kids' wishes to go to out-of-state schools all the time, rather than in-state schools where the tuition is sometimes more than double an in-state school, and the parents don't have the comfort to disappoint their child, and they go ahead and send their kid to an out-of-state school, and the return on investment of tuition is way, way, way lower if you compare to in-state school. So we see this all the time. So maybe borrowing for college is good debt, as I would characterize, but that's pretty much where it ends. It used to be that maybe borrowing for a car was good debt when the interest rates were so low and the car manufacturers were saying, we'll give you 0% interest for a 5-year loan. Sure, fine, so be it, if you have the discipline to take that money and save it or invest it otherwise. But generally, there is no good debt outside of what I just described. So your credit score really, for me, only applies to buying a home. That's about it.
All right, love your perspective. So let's talk about One Wealth. Why that name? What's behind the name?
You know, when my brother and I started the company, we were actually with a larger bank for a very, very long time. We built the practice up to the point where we were successful enough to pull ourselves out of the bigger bank and start our own company maybe about 10 years ago. And my last name's Steele. Of course, my brother's last name's Steele. It's David and Jonathan, and everybody thought somehow our name should be in it, but that felt very narcissistic, frankly, to put our names in the name of the company. And we're very highly collaborative. We collaborate. We're a 12-person company, and we have 380 clients, and we see this as one big group of people working together and collaborating together. And so we used the word one, which felt very inclusive. And that's the etymology of the word, of the name.
Yeah, I like it. I actually like it. I'm going to pause right here, David, and I'm going to get into the community connection segment, which is brought to you by our friends at 5 Minute Bookkeeper. And in this segment is where I invite the community, your community, to share your reviews, your questions, your feedback, and anything you want to share with us to engage with us. So today's feedback comes in the form of a 5-star podcast review from a listener in Australia who goes by the username BB18888. That must have been your BlackBerry pin when BlackBerry was a thing, right? She says, or he says, great podcast, very niche. John Lee Dumas involved in your podcast, very cool. Excellent niche podcast, well done, very informative and easy to listen to. Thank you so much out of Australia, BB18888. Thank you so much. And that was Community Connection, brought to you by 5 Minute Bookkeeper. So now, David, as we're going to the final leg of our conversation, let's hear it in terms of your final thoughts, bringing home, putting into perspective what our listeners should be considering as it relates to wealth building. What should they think about? Particularly, my audience is predominantly in the US and Jamaica. Of course, we have other listeners from over 140 countries, but predominantly in the US and Jamaica, which is based in the Caribbean. So tell us, bring it home for us. What should we consider as your final thoughts where wealth building is concerned?
Well, I have a saying, which is concentration creates wealth, diversification preserves wealth. And so the majority, maybe everybody who has ever developed wealth, substantial wealth, has done so through concentrating their efforts. I don't know, it could be buying a home that they happen to buy in the right area. They leveraged it by borrowing money. They only put 20% down and the home doubled in value and they made 5 or 10 times their money because they leveraged it. Maybe it's because they started a company that eventually gave them tremendously high income, or they were able to sell the company. And once the wealth is created, if you keep parlaying that into one or two things, you may get even wealthier or you may lose it all. So I would say, number one, live within your means. And number two, especially if you're young, concentrate your efforts, which is actually riskier, but it gives you more upside. And once you've developed wealth, by all means, preserve it by diversifying.
Awesome. I know this episode is quite complimentary to one I did a couple weeks ago with Keisha Bailey, who is big on wealth building as well. Shout out to her and her conference, the Wealth Building Conference. You should perhaps come down, David, for that in Jamaica. When have you ever been to Jamaica, by the way?
I have not.
You need to fix that. That's like cardinal sin. Like you need to fix that. All right, so let's get your contact details. How might persons reach you personally, and perhaps definitely One Wealth Advisors? How may they reach you?
You want my email address?
Or your social media, whichever you want to share.
Yeah, probably my email address, dsteele@onewealth.net, DSTEELE@onewealth.net.
All right. And now we move into the segment called Trending Now, which is, of course, brought to you by our friends at 5 Minute Bookkeeper, as well as Next Step Digital. And if you want to upgrade your website, if you want digital marketing assistance, then, of course, Next Step Digital offers comprehensive services from social media marketing to SEO mastery, helping your business thrive online. Visit them at trynextstep.com or email service@trynextstep.com. or call 876-570-1769 to learn more. And in Trending Now, the importance of supporting local arts and cultural organizations. In recent years, the arts and entertainment sectors have become increasingly vital to both cultural enrichment and economic growth. According to the National Endowment for the Arts, the arts and culture sector contributed over $919.7 billion to the U.S. economy in 2019, which is more than the agricultural or transportation sectors. This demonstrates the significant impact that arts and cultural organizations have on our communities and economies. And that's what's trending now. And so I want to say thank you again to David Steele for sharing your insight and your experience as we talked about, the concept of spending less than you earn. We talked about, the credit score, the concept of the credit score in America and his perspective on that. We just talk about all things wealth building, right? Well, not all things, but many things wealth building. And we were able to get some perspective from David. So thank you again, David.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to my listeners for tuning in to this episode of the Entrepreneurial You. As usual, I'm going to ask you that if you enjoy the show any at all, don't be selfish. Sharing is caring. Make sure that you subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave a rating and review and share it with your friends. Just share it, man. Until next episode, I invite you to visit my website at henekawatkis.com, where you have a free ebook waiting for you on how to conduct podcast interviews like a pro. All right. So I want to get your feedback. Remember, send them to me at Heneka@Watkis-Porter.com. And finally, I want you to affirm with me. I balance my creative passions with financial wisdom to achieve holistic success. Take care.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.